para nosotros el contar con la presencia de John Blodgett para impartir la conferencia Perspectivas del Aftermarket en la venta de vehículos comerciales pesados. Es un privilegio. You're welcome, John.
Good morning. Thank you. I'm trying to share my screen now, hopefully. So I'm hopeful that the screen is visible now for you. Good morning, buenos dias. Thank you to the AMDA Association for your invitation to speak today. I am John Blodgett from MacKay and Company, and over the next several minutes, I'll give you our look at how we see the parts aftermarket for medium and heavy duty commercial vehicles and buses and trailers in Mexico. So with that, I will move forward. Hopefully, I'm in Chicago today where it's snowing. Hopefully you're having better weather wherever you are today. I'm assuming you are because you're in Mexico. But my presentation today, I will give you a brief background on who we are, talk a little bit about the process of how we size the market for aftermarket. I think it's important when we show you our numbers that you understand the process we went through, that hopefully you'll be comfortable in the numbers I show you and how, after you've understood how we put that process together. And then we'll talk about how big that market is, how it breaks down by a number of different segmentations, and also what our outlook and forecast is for the aftermarket. And then if you have any questions or doubts, I look forward to answering your questions. MacKay and Company, we are a specialized market research and consulting firm. We've been around for 53 years. I have not been here for all those years, a lot of those years, but not for all those years. Our primary focus, we're very kind of a niche market research consulting firm. We focus on the on-highway commercial vehicle market, which we're going to be talking about today. We do not do anything with the automotive market. We focus on trucks and buses and trailers. We also work in the off-highway agriculture and construction equipment markets. But about 2/3 of what we do is on highway. And because of what our focus is, our clients tend to be the vehicle manufacturers, the component manufacturers, also parts and tires, some of the large dealer and heavy duty distributor organizations, marketing organizations, private equity firms, publishing companies. But the majority of our customers are the vehicle and component manufacturers. So Daimler, PACCAR, Volvo, Navistar, Cummins, Bendix, Eaton, those would all be our typical clients for our types of services. And briefly, our types of services. Today, I'm going to talk about our DataMax service for Mexico. We have a number of DataMax services that profile in great detail what the aftermarket is for parts or tires or lubricants for on or off highway vehicles in a number of countries. The DataMax service are multi-client. We do a number of other multi-client services as well. And we also complete quite a bit of proprietary single client market research. These are all the DataMax services that we currently offer, and I just wanted to quickly show this slide because, as you can see, we do cover Mexico for parts for what we classify as medium and heavy duty trucks, and you can see on the right-hand side there, transit buses and motor coaches. These are primarily 9 tons and above type vehicles. But we do cover parts in Mexico. As you can see, we also cover a number of other vehicle markets in other countries, US, Canada, Brazil, as well as off-highway equipment. For Mexico, we've been privileged to be providing and studying the aftermarket for replacement parts in Mexico since the early 1990s. So our current service covers medium and heavy duty trucks and buses and trailers. This is actually our 6th or 7th, I think it's actually our 7th study, the data I'm going to show you in Mexico since the early 1990s. And actually this year in 2022, we'll be updating it again. We update the Mexico study about every 3 to 5 years. And so this will be an update year. We don't update as frequently as we do in the US, Canada. It's a little bit more difficult in Mexico, but we do update every 3 to 5 years, and we cover over 400 components that we survey on to do that. And so briefly to talk about how we gather the data, in the US and Canada, we complete a lot of mail surveys and online surveys with fleets on an ongoing basis. That has not been a real option for us in Mexico. So we've worked with a research partner in Mexico since the early 1990s. And the primary research tool is on-site interviews with fleets across the country. We usually do interviews in 10 to 11 different states, many different vocations, many different fleet sizes, and somewhere typically between 350 fleets are surveyed. We also contact many of the trucking associations in Mexico and get some information from them and help with some contacts. Additionally, we do telephone interviews with fleets. Those tend to be fairly short, typically focus more on the profile of the fleets. We also survey distribution points. Any business that sells parts to the medium and heavy duty aftermarket, we will contact them about pricing and some other issues related to the aftermarket. That helps us get all the consumption data. How much parts are these vehicles using? Then we also need to look at how many vehicles are out there. So we look at retail sales every year by vehicle type and vehicle size. We've got a mortality model that helps us figure out how long those vehicles stay in the operating population, how many come out, how many come in, either new vehicle sales or imports from the United States. At the end of the day, we really want to know how many vehicles are out there operating on a consistent basis and using parts. And we also look at what's going on in the economy and also in the outlook of that economy. And then finally, these are briefly kind of the questions that we typically ask. We want to know what type of business you're in. Are you, a for-hire carrier? Are you a refuse fleet? Are you a bus fleet? Every fleet has different operating characteristics based on the type of business they're in. So we need to know that because that impacts the size of the aftermarket. We want to know how many vehicles they operate when we survey them, and we weight them based on how many vehicles they operate. So if you have more vehicles, your responses are going to be worth more than somebody who has fewer vehicles. We want to know how much you use your vehicles. So how many kilometers per year do you operate those vehicles? Then how often do you typically replace all the different components, whether it's an alternator, a clutch, a lube oil filter? We want to know what that replacement frequency is. We want to know who's doing the service work. Do you do that service work yourself as the fleet, or do you outsource it? And if you outsource it, where do you go? And for those types of parts that there's an option, so for example, for a used part or a remanufactured part or rebuilt part, what type of part do you use? And at the end of the day, we also want to know, where is that part bought? What channel of distribution do you buy that part from? Once we gather all that information, we can profile it by the items on the right here, by the type, how much of that aftermarket comes from the different vocations or types of businesses, what type of replacement parts, what channel of distribution, and that's going to vary by the types of parts, gets the business, where the service work is completed. We do everything in units, and then as a last step, we apply, as you see today, I'm using US dollars, but we apply it depending on the customer, dollars or pesos or whatever they're interested in seeing the market in at the end of the day. So let's talk about the Mexico aftermarket. We do look at the economy. I'm sure you're probably more versed in the economy than maybe we are, but we have an economist on staff that who actually grew up in Mexico, and he keeps pretty good tabs on what's going down there. His points to us are that AMLO is into the final couple years of his presidency, and traditionally that tends to be a period of time where there's more spending programs and new programs in total. Although since the elections in 2021, and some of the losses taken on by the Moreno party, it probably won't be similar to past presidencies where that goes on. In addition, AMLO needs to forge or work with the Biden administration to figure out a number of joint economic and political interest operations, including the USMCA. And those have kind of slowed down, so there's some headwinds on growth until those get resolved. While GDP was strong in the last year, we're anticipating that it certainly will not be at the same levels probably this year. Probably a good economy, but, and the previous speaker probably gave more details on that, but not to the same levels that we saw last year, about 4.5%, 5%. So how many vehicles are out there, in our estimation, operating on a regular basis in Mexico that are generating the total aftermarket that I'm going to show you here in a minute? So the kind of 2 points in time here, 2015 and 2022. We sized the market, segments have medium duty trucks, heavy duty trucks, all buses. We do break it out in our reports by vehicle size, and then trailers as well. So you can see here, we've gone from about 770,000 vehicles in total to up, we're estimating in 2022, 870,000. Now, we will update the 2022 numbers when we update the study this year, but at this point, we believe it's about 870,000 vehicles there. As you can see, for each of the segments here, there's been growth with the exception of medium-duty vehicles. That segment has shrunk, and it continues to shrink. Medium-duty vehicles used to be the number one type of vehicle to move cargo in Mexico, and there was huge amounts of medium-duty vehicles compared to heavy-duty trucks, for example. But over time, the heavy-duty trucks have taken over those applications, and the medium-duty truck retail sales, and in turn, the total operating population, have shrunk over time. So we've seen that population, medium-duty vehicles, shrink by 20-25%. We're estimating over these 7 years or so. That may turn around as we move forward with e-commerce and other activities in the medium-duty business, but right now that's shrinking. Heavy-duty, we see that as growing and continuing to grow. That's up 20% in the last several years. Buses are up 6-7%. Obviously, the pandemic had an impact on that market somewhat, and trailers are up 27%. But in total, we estimate there's about 870,000 commercial vehicles and buses working on a regular basis in Mexico. So those vehicles generate, we estimate, total aftermarket demand at retail. So what the end user pays for that part at retail of about $4.2 billion in Mexico in 2022. That is up from 2015, about 14-15%. This chart breaks down how that demand segments out by vehicle type. And the big driver of the aftermarket in Mexico, not just Mexico, but also in the US and Canada and Brazil, anywhere we do studies typically, is the heavy duty trucks, the 15 tons and above. There's more of them, the population is growing faster, and they run more miles, kilometers per year, so that generates more parts aftermarket. So we estimate 2/3 of the aftermarket in 2022 is driven by the large trucks, tractors, and straight trucks of the heavy duty trucks. Buses and coaches, another 21% of the aftermarket. Medium duty vehicles is down to about 7% of that total demand, and then trailers. Now, trailers have a big chunk of the operating population, but obviously they don't have engines or transmissions or other parts, so they don't generate that big of a portion of the aftermarket from a parts standpoint. If we break the market down, we cover about 400 components, or over 400 components in Mexico, and that'll probably expand this year. Every time we do a study, we do expand the number of components we look at. We don't quite have as many components in Mexico that we cover in the US and Canada, just because we don't update as frequently. But if you look at the 6 product categories and the components within those categories, these are the 6 what we call product categories. And so power generation, products related internal engine components, external engine components like turbochargers, water pumps, also filters, repair and maintenance items, belts and hoses. Power generation is the largest category, well, almost tied with undercarriage is actually large, but 35% in power generation. Power transmission is about 19%. That is transmissions and wheel ends and wheel seals, undercarriage, shocks and brakes and airbags and other items related to the undercarriage category is the largest category at 36%. And then electrical, cabin chassis, and the others. Electrical is alternators and starters and batteries. And then there's miscellaneous components in the other two categories there. So if we look at where is the service work completed based on the value of the replacement parts. So you can see here in 2022, we have the vehicle operator at about 46% of the service work is completed by the vehicle operator. That is less, and I'll show you a chart soon, less than what we see in the US and Canada. It's also less than what we measured in 2015, but we made a change in how we calculate this between the two study years, or 2 points in time. One thing that's different in Mexico that we don't typically see in the United States or Canada is where the vehicle operator will buy parts and then provide those parts to an independent mechanic or independent service repair shop or independent service provider. And what we're interested in our DataMax services is who's buying the part, because our customers want to know who's making the decision on buying that part. So in Mexico, there tends to be more fleets that will go out and buy parts. Either they think they can get a better price, or they are not as trustworthy of the service provider, mechanic, to get the right parts or provide them with good pricing, so they'll buy the parts. So we break it out a little bit differently, and we started doing that in this last study between those parts that the independent garage provides, that's 31% in 2022, and then the 12% on the independent garage there. But so that's the primary difference between the 2 years. The vehicle operator is still controlling a large segment of the aftermarket. So we're going forward, and that was something we've learned over the years. That and I'm sorry, I got it backwards. The independent garage provides 31%, but the vehicle operator supplies a lot of those parts to the the independent garage. Excuse me, no, the other way around. The independent garage with the no parts. So let me back up just to make sure we're clear on that. So in 2022, the independent garage, take the 31% and the 12% gives you 43%. But there's 12%, that 12% slice there is where the vehicle operator is providing the parts to the independent garage. Whereas the other slice, the 31%, the independent garage is going out and buying those parts and then selling them to the fleet with the service labor associated with that. So you recall I talked about the two largest segments when we looked at the product categories. The largest segments are undercarriage and power generation. They represent about 71% of the aftermarket for all the components that we program. And so I'm showing you both of these product segments to give you just a little different, give you a little feel of the differences between these two. Typically, the less frequent, more complicated the service activity, the more likely the fleet is to outsource or have somebody else complete that service work. So you can see power generation includes engines and internal engine components. So the vehicle operator does a largest percent of the service work based on the value parts, but is less than what you see for undercarriage, which has more components like shocks and struts and other parts that are more frequently replaced and less complicated to replace. So you can see there's a little bit of difference there between the vehicle operator segment between these two product categories. Also, the truck dealer gets a larger percentage of the service work, again, because it tends to be a little bit more complicated, especially as these vehicles get technically more complicated. They're more likely to look for somebody who has the ability to do that service work. We also, for our study in Mexico, and this was primarily at the request of our vehicle manufacturers to participate in the study. They wanted to see the market broken out between the fleets that have vehicles that are 0 to 10 years old, and then above that, 11 years and older. From the vehicle manufacturer's standpoint and the dealerships, they tend to think of the real customers are really those who own vehicles for 0 to 10 years. After that, it's less likely that the people that own those vehicles are going to be customers of the dealership. So we do it a little bit different in the US and Canada, but in Mexico, we break it out by age of vehicle. So you can see here the differences. This is, again, point of service work based on the value of the parts. Where is the service work completed? The vehicle operators for the younger vehicles, typically the larger fleets as well, where they probably have their own garage, are doing 59% of the service work. And then when they outsource it, the independent garage gets the biggest portion, followed by the truck dealer at 6%. Different picture on the older vehicles. They tend to be smaller, typically quite a bit smaller fleets. Vehicle operator does not do the majority of the service work. They do about 26% based on our survey work. And when they outsource the vehicle work, you can see they're very much less likely to go to the truck dealer, much more likely to go to the independent garages. So a little significantly different view based on the age of the vehicles. When we look at this same segment or segmentation of the aftermarket between the US and Canada, you can see in the US, the vehicle operator does even though 46 is a high percent in total, in the United States, it's 71%. But we have a lot of very large fleets. Probably about 45% of the Class 8 vehicles are in fleets that have 500 or more power units. So they're very large fleets that have their own shops. They probably do their own warranty work. This is outside of warranty, but do their own warranty and their own service work. So, so you can see also the other big difference between the Mexico and the US is independent garages and the independent channels, but primarily the independent garages are much more important and hold a much more significant portion of the aftermarket than they do in the United States. When we look at the demand by vocation, what types of businesses, and sometimes it's a little bit of a what type of vehicle, you can see the for-hire market is a big portion of the aftermarket. These are the heavy-duty vehicles. They run more kilometers. They're typically larger fleets, but they represent over half, 56% of the for-hire market, or the aftermarket is in that market. The bus fleets represent another big portion of the aftermarket in 22%. And then you can see the private or industry and commerce is about 16%. And then some of the smaller vocations, construction, agriculture, government, are single digits. But it's important to understand what this segmentation is, because they have different operating characteristics, they have a different number of vehicles, different parts consumption, and that impacts what the total aftermarket is going to be. So it's important for us to get that profile broken down. This is point of final sale. At the end of the day, regardless of who's doing the service work, where are those parts purchased? And so you can see here the truck dealer represents about 21%, which is up a couple points from the last time 2015. HDD is independent heavy-duty parts distributors, or businesses that sell parts primarily to medium and heavy-duty vehicles. And so that is up a little bit from the last time we measured, about 3 points. The biggest difference here is the auto parts store. And the big driver of that is we more clearly define, and over time we learn things. In the when you say auto parts in the US or Canada, people assume you're talking about a retail outlet that primarily sells parts to automotive aftermarket. They may have some parts for the truck market, but they're primarily for the automotive market. That definition is not the same apparently in Mexico. And so we did a better job of defining, apparently auto parts can include heavy duty parts distributors, that term. So we did a better job of defining what we wanted for each one of these distribution channels. In addition to giving examples to the fleets, this business is an auto parts store. This business is a heavy duty independent distributor. So that changed the auto parts. It also changed the specialists a little bit when we look at the market in 2022. But we believe that does better segment, or gives a better representation of what that market looks like. So again, I'm going to give you a couple examples of two product categories. Again, for point of final sale, I'll just give you a little bit difference there. Remember, the power generation tends to have some more technical, complicated service activities. So you can see the truck dealer is 22% there, as opposed to 18% for carriage. And the heavy duty distributor is much stronger in the undercarriage market. And if I don't have a chart for the United States, but the independent heavy duty parts distributors in the US are very strong in the undercarriage market as well, as is the auto parts stores. The other one I want to show you is also the engine distributor. So that would be like your Cummins distributor. Obviously related to the engines or Cummins filtration, that's a bigger portion than you see in the undercarriage market. And then again, we're looking at the two segments of the universe, the younger vehicles, 0 to 10 years old, and then 11 years and up. And you can see the differences there, some strikingly different profile where these folks buy parts from. You see for the younger vehicles, the truck dealer gets 29% of the parts based on the value of the replacement parts. The independent garage is 22, the heavy duty distributors are 34. Quite a bit different profile when we look at the older vehicles. The independent garage, remember they're outsourcing more work to the independent garage, but 43%. And the independent heavy duty parts distributors is 34%. So they do good with both groups, but the truck dealer is down to 10%. So again, a different profile between those two age groups. And then just again, to give you a profile between Mexico and the United States, just as a reference point, in the United States on the right there, the truck dealer plays a bigger share or has a bigger share of the aftermarket than they do in Mexico. Now, what we've noticed in our studies over the years is the truck dealers have become more aggressive and they are doing better and getting more share of the aftermarket. But you can see it's 21% in Mexico versus 49% in the United States. We consider the OEM, original equipment markets, to be the engine distributor and the truck dealer. So you can see between those two in the US, it's about 55%, where in Mexico, that's 24%, where 76% of the aftermarket in Mexico goes through independent channels. Quite a bit different than what we see in the United States, and Canada is fairly similar. We asked some rationale questions in our surveys of the fleet. So why do you buy parts where you buy them? The last study kind of broke down into 3 different areas, scale of 1 to 5, or 5 being extremely important and 1 not being that important. You can see the top segment there: product quality, brand reputation, having that OE part, very important. Past experience with that distribution channel is very important. And a little bit below that, credit, ability to provide credit, immediate availability of the part. Obviously, if you don't have the part on the shelf, this doesn't really matter because I'll go to the next channel. But having the part is important. Delivery and service, emergency service were all important. And then the final group here, not that they're not important, but they didn't get rated as high. Hours of service, technical advice, and then price is down there. And the reality is on price, it's not that price isn't important, but you got to hit a lot of these items above price, and then we're going to talk price is typically how it works. So price is usually lower, but it usually gets discussed in every transaction. And just one other quick slide on the aftermarket. In our studies we've done, reman and rebuild has never been a big portion of the aftermarket as far as how we measure it. It's gotten a little bit bigger in 2022, 3% of the market. Rebuild's gotten a little bit bigger at 6%. In the United States, remanufactured parts represent about 17%. And new is by far the majority in the United States as well. It's up over 80%. So similar, kind of the same neighborhood in Mexico. It's just there's not as much reman as we see north of the Mexican border there. So looking out the aftermarket, looking at the aftermarket out in the out years. And I heard the previous speaker, he mentioned some of the same items. So I think we're all kind of looking at some of these issues of potential concerns. But one is the economy, and we've gotten through COVID. That obviously had an impact on the aftermarket and everything else. The economy looks not spectacular, but it looks pretty good. We never know what's going to impact it down the road, but it looks fairly positive. Retail sales look positive, and the forecast looks pretty good. I'm going to talk about some of the issues potentially with that forecast. Now, we don't make a retail sales forecast. We rely on other organizations that provide that for our modeling. But we also look at fleet utilization. How much are the fleets, they have the vehicles, but how much are they using the vehicles? Because that impacts the aftermarket. So that fleet utilization remains strong. It's been very strong for the last 12, 18 months, but will remain strong. The other things we look at in the aftermarket is what's the impact going to be down the road with electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, or new technology in the vehicles, electric axles, emissions components that weren't required a while back. That's one of the highest growth areas, or had been in the US and Canada over the last decade. So we start implementing those when we see those vehicles coming into the market that have those components. We don't have a lot of the alternative power yet making a difference in the aftermarket. And the nice thing in the aftermarket is we have enough warning as to what vehicles are coming into the marketplace so we can profile that aftermarket correctly. Supply chain, and not just in the aftermarket, not just the distribution points of the dealers being able to get parts, which is a concern, but also in building new trucks, building new cars, building new refrigerators, dishwashers. If the manufacturers of these appliances, for example, can't get parts, they're not going to ship the appliances, which impacts trucking. Trucking touches on all industries. So these supply issues are a problem. Hopefully they're going to get resolved here in the next 12 months or become better, as well as the shipping issues. But we'll have to watch that as we move forward. COVID, hopefully it's mostly over. We never really know, but obviously that had an impact on the last couple of years. Previous speaker spoke about Ukraine. That's obviously, it's a small country, but it can have a big impact on the rest of the world. The gentleman spoke about fertilizer. That is a big impact. Ukraine and Russia has one of the biggest productions of wheat, and they're probably not really focused on planting wheat this spring if they're in war. So that can have problems. The fertilizer from Russia impacts so many different things. It impacts Brazil and the food that they produce, and then the chickens they produce off that food they produce. So there's a lot of potential impacts, and what's going to happen on the oil side of the business, which may be good for Mexico, although the rest of what's going on is not too good. But what are all those other impacts going to be? So we take a look at those. Again, we'll be updating our study again in 2022. We'll do our best to give our best outlook on how we think things are going to look. But you never know. All forecasts are wrong at some point. But this is where we've been from an aftermarket standpoint. We're into 2022 now. We're doing the study in 2022. So these numbers are still a forecast. You can see 2020, we had to revise our modeling when the pandemic hit. And 2020 was a fall off in aftermarket demand, but it came back very strong in 2021. And even we're anticipating stronger in 2022. This is segmented by types of vehicles. I'll get into each vehicle type here in a second. But we're anticipating, we don't forecast recessions, but we're anticipating fairly good growth out over the next 5 years on a compounded annual growth rate for the aftermarket. Now, the one segment that is not growing, at least at this point, is basically flat to down, as I mentioned before, is the medium duty vehicles. So we'd estimate that's 300 million, be down to flat over the next 5 years. Unless, of course, we start to see a pickup, and we're starting to see some of that in the U.S., a pickup in some of the medium-duty vehicle sales to address that last mile e-commerce business. Although that tends to be the lighter vehicle classes, some of that is hitting in the heavier medium-duty vehicles. The heavy-duty power units, the forecast for retail sales is fairly positive. We also have a lot of vehicles out there. We're looking at how many vehicles are out there. Where are they in their age distribution, and what does that require as far as parts demand and our service requirements, and that will drive parts demand. So that's what drives our model. So we're looking at 4.6% growth in 2022, and then a compounded annual growth rate of about 4% over the next 4 or 5 years. So again, we'll update that again this year, but that's our current outlook. And then if I combine all the vehicle types here, including the trailers, including the buses, we're looking at 2022 to be up almost 10%. So big jump in the bus market, which was further down than the other vehicle segments, which has helped bring the market back up at a higher percentage. But you can see 2021, we believe came in about 3.8 billion. We believe 2022 will be back up to pre-pandemic levels of 2019. And then we've got a forecasted growth rate of about 4.5–5% over the next 5 years, over 4 billion. So that's our current outlook on the market. I welcome your questions, doubts. let me know if you have any questions. And I appreciate your time.
Thank you, John, for the presentation. It was very interesting, the information that you provided us. And we have a couple of questions that we want to ask you related with the electric vehicles in the forecast. What impact is going to have this kind of vehicles in the forecast that you provide us this morning?
Yeah, so we don't really have a lot of electric vehicles in the truck forecast. We're starting to see more in the bus market. When we did the bus market, last time we updated was 2018, and we did not have any buses that or electric buses then, but we will when we update here in 2022. I don't know the exact impact there, but quite honestly, in the truck market, we are not, because we forecast out for 5 years, and we forecast outside of warranty, and the number of electric vehicles in the medium and heavy duty truck market are very small at this point, and the forecasts are very small. Now, 5 years is not a long way out. But so after 5 years, we'll probably see more of it. But in the 5-year forecast for the aftermarket, there's not a very big impact yet from electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles. We're doing the same thing in the United States and Canada. There's certainly a lot of attention, a lot of interest on fleets and companies, and a lot of goals by companies to sell a certain percentage of electric vehicles and other powered vehicles, alternative powered vehicles. But what we're most interested in is what are the true numbers going to be in the operating population that are generating aftermarket parts demand as we look out over the next 5 years. And we just don't have that many there yet. So there's not enough to even include in our forecast in the next 5 years. Now we may change that over next year or the following year, but as we look out right now, that it's not a large enough percentage to put in what is primarily kind of a short-term outlook, a 5-year outlook in that operating universe.
Thank you very much for your answer, John. Obviously, the electric vehicles is a very important thing for our dealers, and we need to be aware of that in the near future. And related with the fleet market, what's your opinion related with the boost and the cost of the aftermarket in the dealers? How is going to be the impact in the dealers related with aftermarket and the sales in the near future?
Yeah, well, let me make one more comment on the electric vehicle market. You made a very good point as far as the importance to dealers for those vehicles. One thing we talk about quite a bit here is the outlook for electric vehicles is not the same across each country. There are different markets that are going faster into those markets, providing more incentives. The United States, California is a good example. So you really do have to be aware of what's going on in your market. What types of vocations do you have that may be more open or maybe faster to accept electric vehicles? So you need to keep a look on that. I believe your second question there it relates to, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, pricing and the concern of inflation. And a big part of our forecast is price. We typically have prices increasing 1.5% to 2% per year, but that has gone up to anywhere between 5% and 7% for last year and the out years, or for this year. It's not an out year, 2022. So part of the growth in the aftermarket is the impact from price increases, all related to that supply and demand and inflation. So our industry is not going to avoid that. So that is an issue for the aftermarket. But I'm not sure if that's exactly what you're asking me.
Yeah. Thank you very much, John. And another question, which is very important for our dealers also, is related to the forecast that you provide us, if you have the information by region, because obviously the Mexican market is so different in the different states of our country. So if you can provide us information related with that, that would be great.
Yeah, I do not have information by region. I know we've looked at populations by states, and obviously tends to be a lot more demand on the states that border the United States because of that cross-border traffic. But we have not broken down, and we should. We've done that in the United States. We've done that in Canada, and that's something we should likely address in Mexico. But I apologize, I do not have regional breakdowns for that currently.
Thank you very much, John. Obviously, we need to work together in that for the future, and obviously our dealers are going to be very interested in that information. Thank you very much for your presentation this morning. It was a pleasure. Have a nice day.
Thank you.